On July 23rd, 1846, Henry David Thoreau was arrested for having refused to pay his annual 1.5 poll tax for 6 years. Roughly $60 today. But it was the principle of the matter. He didn't want his money supporting the ongoing Mexican-American War, nor make him complicit in Southern slavery. He would go on to write, if 1,000 men were to not pay their tax bills this year, that would not be violent and bloody measure, as it would be to pay them and enable the state to commit violence and shed innocent blood. Do we pay taxes? Should we pay taxes? And what is the question that they're trying to get at in this passage? So it starts out with the Herodians. So that would be the local government officials, the ones who are in control for Rome. And the people who have been fighting with Jesus all along, the other Jewish religious leaders who have a different understanding of how you practice the faith. And so the two of them, it appears, are now working together. Like if you have been reading through the scripture, you'll see that they sort of start moving closer and closer together. And so they've come up with a way to be able to arrest Jesus. Because right at the moment, Jesus has entered Jerusalem and is teaching in the temple. So, what does that mean? Yesterday, in Jesus' story, he came into Jerusalem with a parade with people shouting and singing and praising God. And he went into the temple. And when he got to the temple, he saw that it was full of people selling stuff, and money was everywhere. And he got so angry at what the temple looked like, what was happening there, that he overthrew all the tables. And then he told a story. He told a story about what happens to the prophets. Of course, it's about vineyards. But basically, the story is that God keeps trying to send someone to you, to change you, to transform you. And each time, your grapes wither and die. And then we have this story. The challenge. They come up to Jesus with a desire to provoke an action. And so they flatter him first, right? Like, you know everything. You are amazing and know the truth. Your words are so wonderful and truthful. So we have a question for you. Is it lawful? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? Now that's an interesting question because all of us pay lots of taxes, right? So they're asking about one set of taxes. They're asking about the tax to empire. They're not asking about the Herodians' local tax, right, to themselves. They're not asking about the Pharisees' local tax to the temple. They're asking about the tax to empire, to Caesar. And so Jesus, in response to this question, when asked, should we pay them or should we not, calling out their hypocrisy or acknowledging it, says, why are you putting me to the test? bring me a denarius. So that would be the local wage that a normal working person would get for the day. He asked them to bring a coin. Now, I want you to remember we just overturned all the tables in the temple because Jesus was angry that the temple was not a house of prayer, not a place of welcome for the poor. And what happened in the temple, because it's about the money changers, right? What money are they changing? They're changing the Roman coin into temple coin. So, in asking for a denarius, a Roman coin, they have not done what they were supposed to do on entering the temple, which is change the denarius into temple coin, right? So they are choosing to be part of empire at this moment. They have brought out the coin of the empire. And so Jesus then says to them, whose head is on this coin? And they tell him the head on the coin is Caesar's. So it's like if any of you were to pull out your coins, if anybody has a coin anymore, whose head would be on it? Depends on which one. Lincoln, Jefferson, George Washington. I don't even know anymore. I never see the coins, right? So on the head of that denarius is Caesar. And on the flip side, what's on the flip side of our coins? In God we trust. On the flip side of their coin is an ode to Caesar the god. And so that coin could be interpreted in a whole bunch of ways if Jesus wanted to explicate the coin, right? He could say, you're asking for me to support a graven image. A person who is not God on this coin is claiming to be God. But he doesn't talk about that, because remember how Jesus deals with questions? He deals with them in a number of ways. In this instance, he's trying to push them back to make decisions. He's not trying to give us an answer. He's trying to make us ask more questions, to think about what is happening, to consider what it means. So Jesus says then, as they're looking at that coin with Caesar's face on it, give to Caesar's what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. What does that mean? How do you interpret that statement? What are the multiple ways you could interpret that? You could do a Thoreau here, right? And say that to pay taxes is to go against God. To pay for the army to destroy other people in the Mexican-American War is wrong. To pay for the army to support slavery is wrong. So to pay taxes is therefore wrong. And be willing to go to jail for it. Or you could say, pay to Caesar's what is Caesar's. So pay your taxes. Right? It doesn't say don't pay your taxes, but it doesn't say do pay your taxes. What it says after that is give to God what is God's. So what is God's? How do you answer that question? What do you give to God? So one of the ways you could answer that question is, the earth is the Lord's and all that's in it. Therefore, everything would be God's. So you're to give everything to God, and therefore not to give anything to Caesar. But how we answer this question about what our relationship to government is and to taxes is complicated, not easy, and asks us to think about things that complicate our role in life. Because until this last couple of years, I would have totally critiqued government and told you about how terrible it is. My last sermon on this passage was about budgets and critiques of budgets. So if we're critiquing what we pay to the government, how are we demanding of our political officials that they follow the things that we think are important? Those things that Jesus has been teaching us throughout this gospel story. How are we making sure people are healed? What do we do to pay so that there are hospitals and doctors and nurses and everyone needed to take care of us, to pay for us when we are ill? What percentage of the budget is that? When we look at our budget, after Social Security and Medicare, the next biggest chunk, sometimes bigger, is to the Army, to our military. Is that what we want our budget to look like? So that means when they're arguing over the things that they always want to cut that impact people's life, it is the smallest sliver of that pie. And yet those smallest slivers are usually the most important pieces to normal people. How do we talk about budgets? How do we critique people's budget plans? And how do we demand that our taxes do the right thing? Because we could be Thoreau right now, right? I don't want my tax dollars to be slaughtering people in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Iran, Yemen. The list could go on. And yet, that's what we are funding with our dollars. And I don't remember how many of you know, but during the 60s, it was a real question about paying taxes, right? Will you pay your taxes to fund the Vietnam War? And people were choosing not to pay taxes. Or at least cutting out of the taxes the portion that would go to the military. So only paying the percentage that went to everything else. But that was before. How do we talk about what is our relationship to government now that we are in a world where Christians are telling us what the government should be and what it should do? And their understanding of God conflicts mightily with my understanding of God. Because they want to deal with things like whether women should be allowed to have safe, healthy pregnancies. And I want to say, why do we have so many homeless people in California and what are we doing to fix it? Right? They're saying to me, we need the 10 Commandments in every school. And I say to them, well, that's good, but which set of the 10 Commandments do you want? There's a number of them in the Bible, and they're different. And if you're claiming to be Christian, which we'll get to in 2 weeks, Jesus says the only commandments you need are to love God with everything you have and love your neighbor as yourself. So aren't you putting the wrong commandments up in the schools? And the Christians are saying these books, these amazing books that make you think, are dangerous. For instance, Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. So as a teenager, the first book that talked about what it meant to be a girl. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. A book like The Handmaid's Tale, like Octavia Butler, that talks about what California looks like after the apocalypse. It's dangerous. Any book that has a family that isn't the family that they deem as right. And so when we talk about what is the government and what should be the government, does it change now? Because of how people are trying to use the government. That's why this question is complicated and Jesus doesn't give you an answer. He lets you struggle with it. What is the things of Caesar? What are the things of empire that you should give to empire? And there isn't an easy question in answering that. Because we can choose right now which vision of the world we want to live in. A very dark vision, a very hopeful vision, neither of which live out the vision that God has for the world. And so how do you choose? How do you choose what we do in relationship to our government? Most of the time we say they're separate, right? Church and state should be far apart. One should not interfere with the other. And yet we've changed our Supreme Court that has now said the state can tell us what religion to practice and how. That's not really a separation of true church and state. So how do we deal with this question of church and state when Jesus just makes it complicated? And I don't know that I have a good answer for you, because the answer is you're meant to struggle with it. You're meant to figure out the ways that you can be the Christian that Jesus calls you to be. And that means that you are always going to be at odds with the government. Even when the political person that you think is amazing is in office, they are always going to conflict with what Jesus calls you to do. It doesn't matter what party they are. They will always do things that aren't what we are faithfully called to be and do. And so I wish I could tell you, yes, pay taxes. No, don't pay taxes. My advice is pay taxes, because if you don't pay taxes, they will garnish your wages and they can put you in jail. So I would not recommend not paying taxes. But I would recommend, as the Congress went home so they could campaign, I mean, how many weeks do you need to campaign, right? Have any of you seen Eric Swalwell? Just asking. Because if he was really campaigning, wouldn't we be seeing him all over Fremont? But I haven't seen him in person. He's here instead of working on the farm bill, because they didn't pass that before they went home to campaign. And the farm bill is one of the most important bills that has to be passed depends, they changed its length of time. But the farm bill has within it the SNAP programs. And so by choosing not to vote on the farm bill, they are putting in danger the money that we have set aside from our taxes to help those who don't have enough money to buy food to eat. because they needed to campaign, and yet we know we haven't seen any of them. So how do we deal with that? This month is usually dedicated by Bread for the World to us contacting our legislators to tell them that they need to help those who don't have enough money to pay for the food that can help their families. Is that where we need to put our focus? When we talk about paying our taxes and giving to God, what do we mean? Because I want to say, I think what churches do is amazing, that they establish food pantries and they feed so many people. But the thing is, they can't give every person who needs food the amount of food they need to live for an entire month. The only way to do that is to pull the entire nation's resources. Churches can just fill in a small gap. They can't provide the whole gap. And so to say that it's the church's job puts all sorts of people in danger. And so there's a role for government. The question is, how do we decide and who do we support so that we can look at that coin and not flinch because what's happening with it? How do we choose who to support in the empire? Where to give our funds and money? I mean, this week, if you're all over Twitter, the big question is, will you read the LA Times or the Washington Post anymore because they decided not to do something? Because the billionaire owners decided to stay out of politics. And yet the question is, if their tagline is democracy dies in the dark and they choose to stay out of politics, aren't they letting democracy die in the dark? So the point of all of this is that this question is complicated and not easy, and there aren't easy answers about what our relationship to the state is and should be. Because our relationship to the state should always be to think about what Jesus is calling us to be and do. He calls us to love and love extravagantly, and he shows that in every person he encounters and heals, in every group of people that he feeds extravagantly so they are no longer hungry. He shows that every time he confronts evil, pushes it away, pushes it out, and says it's not welcome here anymore. And so our relationship to the state is to take those actions that Jesus did, to welcome the unloved and unlovable, the cast out and cast down, to take the least and the last and lost and figure out how we, and we the state, can help, can practice love in ways that help people. Pay to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God. And since everything is God's, our call is to live love in ways that make love grow. Amen.